gets you pumped up is right when you walk in. This is the kind of place I want to go work. We don't want companies to force people to come back to the office. Why do people want to work there? And they're thinking about all those aspects. You never know where some inspiration is going to come from, and taking the time to figure out someone's real culture, that you're getting to test new ideas and iterate quickly. But tell me in how you actually use it. Just make sure we don't lose that human engagement. How do I do my best work, intentional work in that period of time? What we're looking for is just these really strong human connections. Meet at this landmark. The people in the space could also start to talk about these experience-based spaces, these kind of immersive spaces. And they weren't just there for gimmicks or looks. It was really there to bring people together.
We've been talking a lot about AI, but what about the spaces where AI is developed? Who's designing those workplaces, and how are they different? And are the bots involved? Welcome to What the F is Happening to the Office, where we explore how work and our work environments are evolving. Hi, I'm Bob Fox, founder of Work Design. And for each show, I sit down with leading thinkers, designers, and innovators who are shaping the future of how and where we work. These conversations are for anyone who's curious about how work connects to people, culture, and place. So if you care about the future of work, our work environments, and want an unfiltered view into what's next, you're in the right place. And we welcome you to be a part of the conversation. So be sure to subscribe, like, and comment. Today, I'm joined by Jeremy Redding, global workplace leader and senior principal at DLR Group. He's an architect, educator, and workplace futurist who blends creativity, technology, and human experience. He helps some of the biggest tech organizations like Google and Facebook design tech-enhanced, people-centered workplaces. Jeremy also teaches a graduate design course at the University of Nebraska, where he challenges students to explore what-if scenarios that inform the future workplace. Jeremy, welcome, and thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. This was going to be fun.
Your path into workplace design wasn't traditional. I think you started with a passion for design and experience, and that led to something called the Seattle Design Nerds. I mean, can you tell us a little bit about how that began?
Yeah, this is one of those cases that you never know where your path is going to lead you. And, I often tell people, just say yes to the different opportunities that come up. And the Seattle Design Nerds was born out of it was actually two of us, me and Trevor Dykstra out in Seattle. We were both giving a presentation to the AIA Young Architects, and they were looking for up-and-coming designers and just to see what kind of work they were doing. And the two of us were just presented at this event. And immediately after the event, someone from AIA Seattle came down to us and said, hey, we're going to test this new idea. We want to do the Seattle Design Festival. It was going to be the first year of it. It was modeled off of some of the Tokyo Design Festivals and some of these things in cities to try and get the public to engage in design, make it a little bit more easier to understand, easier to navigate. And so the two of us were asked to put together this festival. And in the first year, and we were the ones building it. So we were the ones constructing all the different components of it. And there was probably 20 events scattered around the city. And it was mildly successful. That, what we learned in that was when you have 20 small things scattered around, there's no big thing to really entice a bunch of people. So it ended up being a lot of industry people coming to look and see our own thing, if you will. And so what we did learn, though, is him and I really liked just developing fun ideas. It was a way to exercise design muscles by putting together kind of wild things. We would go and buy a whole bunch of plastic and tape and go get some box fans at Goodwill and do these giant inflatables or test different lighting pieces. And so we found out about this group called the Design Nerds, and there's a number of chapters in different cities. And so the two of us founded the Seattle Design Nerds. So the second year of the festival, we orchestrated the festival and we said, hey, instead of 20 little things scattered all around the city, what if we group them all together in one spot, essentially take over a block? And so we reserved 2 streets and we did these giant installations. And one was this thing we called the creature that was an inflatable that went down an entire 2-block alley. It had, little plastic arms waving out the side of it that people could put their hands in. We filled it full of beach balls. And I got this great picture of my son that looks like the Banksy photo where they're throwing the flowers, only it's my son throwing, a beach ball at people walking through it. And it was just fun. You saw, people of all ages wanting to crawl inside of this and, live in this weird blobby air inflated world. And so that's what was the birth of the Seattle Designers, just this, group of design misfits looking to explore and test new ideas. We kind of hand in hand started to use the design festival as a way to test some of these ideas. And then of course, invite a lot of other designers and artists to take part in it annually.
And it sounds like there was a lot of public education that was really part of the whole process where people were experiencing design firsthand.
Yeah, it was, what was cool about it was an umbrella organization where the landscape, IIDA, AIA, urban groups, all of that were part of this organization in a way and helped develop the Design in Public, which was the umbrella organization. And so that's exactly right. So we ended up having, you could have different types of plants that people could come and learn about. We had, sessions where people would do chalk art. We had, a lot of it was inspired a little bit by the work that Candy Chang did after the New Orleans hurricane, that I wish this was stickers that got put up on all of those dilapidated buildings around the city. And people could say, I wish this was a coffee bar. I wish this was a public park, or any of that kind of stuff. And so that was really what inspired some of those initial ideas. Is how do we get the public just to start to engage with design and make it, way easier to comprehend? Because I think we get in our own design world, we end up using all these big ideas and big words. And I think it kind of freaks people out and they don't want to engage in the way that we want them to,
I'm curious, how did it go from 2 guys to the scale of the city? Because now you have like 7,000 people that show up for the event.
Yeah, now we have, it's in its, I think 15th year. And I think we're getting, 40 or 50,000 people to now come to the event. So it's grown considerably. But in the early days, yeah, we were excited if we had, 500 people on a day or 1,500 people, that kind of thing was a big deal. And it did originate exactly like you're saying. So it was 2 people. We started to meet. And in fact, a lot of the times we were meeting in DLR Group's office after hours because we didn't have a spot to come together. And it started to be word of mouth, just designers, people in tech. Our group wasn't even primarily architects. It was people from all over the design industry. They too were just interested in testing new ideas. As new technology would come out, we would use that as a way to kind of test something in public where you don't necessarily have a client that's directing it. We did one that was called Bot Bags that ended up being these series of inflatable bags that as you touched them, they would change color. We did some projection mapping on the troll, that's the Fremont troll that's kind of famous in Seattle underneath one of the bridges. And so it just ended up being this group of misfits that would meet and we would constantly be testing stuff. And then we started to get invited to do other art shows, other events in the city. Amazon will hire us or Microsoft would hire us to do some kind of fun, engaging piece. And so
yeah, curious, like what fueled the growth? How it sounds like this thing that kind of went viral.
It did. I think it's just that it was so approachable and we had fun with it. There was definitely a couple key installations that we saw. There was a great one we called Icy Hot. So this group wanted to throw a party and they wanted something to help get people to come to it. And so they asked us to work together with them. They would throw this annual big party. And so we found a building that in plan, it looks like a letter E almost. And it's a multi-story building. So it's 4 stories tall. And on the 3rd story, there is a roof deck. And that's where there's 2 roof decks in what would be the void of the E, if you will. And so we did 2 inflatables in each of those outdoor courtyards. And so you would come up the elevator and you would decide if you're icy or hot. And so you would wrap this blue or red ribbon, tie it on you somewhere. Once you got upstairs, you could go into icy, which was where we had the bar, if you will, and some very calming music, blue lights. And then if you went over to the other side, that's where the DJ was set up. And so it was all dancing and all that kind of stuff. That was the red. That was the hot. It ended up actually being really hilarious over the course of the night, everybody dancing in that giant plastic bubble that had very little ventilation. All that sweat went onto the ceiling, and the ceiling started to collapse at night and rain down, other people's sweat. It was disgusting, but it was a really fun event that, people loved. And so that kind of word of mouth started to say, hey, there's this group, the Seattle Design Nerds, is starting to do these fun installations that are interactive. So we got others to join. And, probably at our high point, we had over 20 people. And so we would all just meet after hours, after work, and people would say, I got an idea that I'd like to test. And so we would all have fun and test these ideas, self-funded for the most part in the beginning, but just started to be this word of mouth until it started to fund itself, which was great.
Yeah, it sounds like it would be a lot of fun and, a lot of opportunity too.
And I think for younger people, when you're just starting out in practice, you're looking for a way to stretch your design muscles. And I think that was it for us, right? Everybody has some version of that. And you can be doing that through the work. You can be doing that outside of the work. And I think just having the opportunity to do both of those things, it's just that much quicker that you're getting to test new ideas and iterate quickly and just have fun with it. That's why we went to schools. So have fun with it.
So I'm curious, how do you think the festival's experiments influence the way people think about the workplace?
So how it engages with the workplace, I think, and just the city in general, I think the people started to realize, and I think designers started to realize, it was great to get the type of input from just everyday individuals. And we started to find ways that we could, like I said, with the I wish this was type of stickers, that you could find very almost elementary ways to get really big ideas from people. And over the course of the last, 25 years or so, I think the tech office has done this really well. They've found ways to create very high user experience spaces, that it's hitting on all of your senses. It's visual, and there's a sense of smell. They've got food. They're bringing people together socially. They're thinking about all those aspects. And so I think some of these design festival type things, it really starts to lend itself towards this multi-sensory experience that, of course, comes into the workplace. It comes into hospitality. It comes into all these things that we're seeing now that are very high touch in a lot of ways. It's what got me into workplace ultimately. I was working at DLR Group, and I never started with the dream of working in workplace. Rather, I just enjoyed design process and iterating. And it could be any type of project. I had a early moment in my career. And I think when you come out of school, you're like, oh, I want to do museums and, art galleries. That's where the really high-end design work happens. And I was working on an eye clinic, and I had this really great client, Brian Duvall, who was really open to figuring out what that should mean. How does somebody move through the space? Can we play with transparency, think about different ideas? And we ended up creating a really great space that won a bunch of design awards. And it was like this triggering moment for me where I realized, it's not about project type so much as it is about a client and you having a vision to be testing new ideas. It was really, the possibility could be in any project type. And so I've always taken that kind of into my career. And so, whether it was designing a school or a civic building, anything, I always look for what's the opportunity here? How do I make that connection with the client? And so I was working across, lots of different types of work, and an opportunity came up where we were working on a project with Google. Our project manager and designer decided to take other opportunities, and they were moving. And so our lead in the office said, Google kind of likes unique design experiences. And Jeremy, you're doing this design nerds thing. How about you come over and take this on, help finish this project, and it was, we had to do quite a bit of redesign, but in a very short time and a lot of dedication. Of course, there's a lot of late nights and weekends that happen in our industry, but it was exactly one of those situations. And we redesigned this project. It went on to be very successful, win a bunch of awards that, Googlers were very happy about it. And that became, all of a sudden, I was like, you know what? This is a great space where you get to really test some new ideas. You get to engage with people. I love going to sit in one of our offices for a day and watching people come through it, see when they're going to their desk, how they come together. And so there was just a lot of connection there between those two things that was really fun to see.
Well, it's almost like you're creating these immersive experiences for people. where they get to experience a variety of different things. And it's like you've carried that now into the technology world. How do you think that's influenced the process?
As you said, it becomes very immersive. So we often think about storytelling in place. In the space that I was just talking about, we ended up having this, it was located in Seattle. So we ended up having this narrative of this mountain to sound. And so we created neighborhoods, mountain, forest, valley, sound. And in each of those, we ended up having landmarks. And so it started to become these spots that instead of saying, I sit in this desk in this row, it's I sit in mountain and let's meet at this landmark. The people in the space could also start to talk about these experience-based spaces, these kind of immersive spaces. And so and they weren't just there for gimmicks or looks. It was really there to bring people together. In the forest, we had this idea, and this came directly from some of the work we did with the design nerds, is we had this thing we called the nest, and it was almost like a bird's nest with a big couch inside of it. And it became a spot that, 18 people could come to sit in it in the morning or in the afternoon if you wanted to do a team meeting and get everybody out of maybe their usual spot. But it became a landmark. It became a good example of these things that are, iconic or landmark in the space, but they serve a real purpose, this bringing people together. It's community based. I think we lean sometimes too much on the technology of the space. For what we're looking for is just these really strong human connections. And so creating spaces that do that through storytelling and immersive design, they do go a long way towards that.
Yeah, you talk about that people connection, and I'm thinking that that's something that really has become a much bigger priority since the pandemic. How does that kind of change the way that you think about design, think about the process, think about those stories that you want to capture?
Yeah, we completely changed some of our initial design process. Exactly what you're saying is we're trying to get people to think about how they connect. How do you do, what's that mean intentionally? We don't want companies to force people to come back to the office just to come back to the office. But if you put purpose behind that, then all of a sudden it doesn't feel like a requirement. It feels intentional, and I think that's a hard thing, I think, to get alignment on. So typically when we're starting a process, and I think a lot of people in the industry do this well now, is there's a long engagement process. Ours is called a values cards, and we go through a whole system of asking them how they use the space, the different types of ways they use the space, anything from the different type of work experiences you have in the day of, what part of it is social, what part of it are you need heads down workspace, what part of it are you meeting with somebody, and what's the size of that meeting and how often is that happening? But don't tell me in just a factual sense, but tell me in how you actually use it and how you imagine using that space, right? And sometimes that can be by watching them. Sometimes it can be by listening to them. Of course, interviewing a larger group of people. You want to encourage them as much as you can, like go slow to go fast. So you really take the time to understand how they use it, what their culture is like, because that's, I think, the thing that gets forgotten a lot of times is people's requirements don't align with their culture, then forget it. We saw for forever, I think the whole industry saw people that saw a tech office and they said, that's what we want, do that for us. And then they develop it and they're like, oh, this doesn't work for us at all. Our culture doesn't allow for people to go hang out and sit not at their desk. If they're not at their desk, they're not working. So we see that all the time. And so it's that idea is like, how do you get a culture alignment with the idea of purpose-driven work and making sure that you have the connection between those two things?
I'm thinking a lot of what you do is unique. And where do you find your inspiration? What kind of for trends and identity of what's next for the workplace industry?
So in my role, we have 35 offices. And so in my role, I'm overseeing our overall workplace team. And so what's nice about that is I kind of can engage in lots of different project types. And so I could be working with a financial group in New York, or I could be working with a tech company or science company down in Texas, and then, somebody in Silicon Valley all at the same time. And so it is nice because you start to see some ideas that can be trending ideas, other ideas that might lend one to the other, that you can push somebody else. I think often the tech industry thinks that they're always leading the charge. And most of the time they are, but sometimes I'll see something, even in a public project. Like I think, some of the public work we did in Portland, for example, they were the first to say, we're going to have all user restrooms, or every restroom was going to be for all users, and they did it really well, where it was cordoned off and didn't feel weird and all that stuff. And now you see that starting to happen in other places, but you never know where some inspiration is going to come from and how that's going to drive. And so that's one really great place I found, is just like that broad spectrum. And then the other thing is, as we talked about, very at the beginning, is I started teaching about 5 years ago at the University of Nebraska, and it's a master's class, 5th and 6th year grad students. And we started primarily talking about what is the future of the workplace, what does adaptive reuse of some of our urban centers look like, and asking these big questions. And what I love about it is these are all young, 21 to 25-year-olds for the most part. They've never sat in an office. They only have, probably interned into one for a little bit or visited their parents' office. And so they have no preconceived idea of this is what the office has to look like. I love that they just can talk about, this is the kind of place I want to go work, basically. And so we start to think about things in that way. And what I've noticed is they're very experienced, immersive driven spaces that are desired. So you think about, a couple examples are they're all into food, of course. And so, but there'd be a lot of these adaptive reuse areas where you might have a vertical farm adjacent to a series of restaurants or a market. The offices that support those, or offices that support the kind of people that love culinary, are all next to each other. You can imagine something like Italy, for example, where they're making the fresh bread and the cheese and all that kind of stuff. And that's then serving a couple restaurants that are adjacent to it. You've got housing nearby, and then you have an office. And so the office might be working in the food industry. They may not be working in the food industry, but they love the idea that, hey, over lunch, I'm going down there and getting fresh bread, and we've got this great outdoor patio to go. And maybe I'm working in the morning and I'm working late in the afternoon, but the middle of the day, I'm, experiencing this place. There was a lot of versions of that, or around science, or around climbing gyms, or it was just, it wasn't such a 8 to 5 type of model. It was much more a full spectrum of your whole day in this one place, which I thought was really interesting. And you're starting to see that now, right? You're starting to see lots of experience driven developments happen in our urban centers and suburban centers and so forth.
Yeah, no, I would love to work in an Italy.
Yeah, I know. Me too.
How do you think designers balance the authentic human spaces with growing role of technology in our work environments?
It's a tough balance, I think, a lot of times, is I think we often let the technology drive it too much, right? We see that it starts to become an interface that you're forced to engage with now, and it's not seamless. And I think that's part of the reason why you're seeing such a push towards, hospitality and other things being driven into the workplace, is because people want a much more, you like when you walk into a hotel and there's great music playing, and, you're checking in at the bar instead of some security desk. And, it gets you pumped up. It's right when you walk in, right? So like you're transitioning to that place. And so I think we've started to see that happen in the workplace. Right now we're unfortunately in a really awkward spot where we want this like beautiful, invisible, seamless interface that you don't notice the tech, that you walk in and the lighting is right and it knows that you and I are going to meet. And so it automatically lights our pathway to the conference room, and it knows we're going to have a certain kind of conversation, and it sets that up. That's the vision of where we hope AI now can take us into this. But right now we're still in the spot where, half the time your conference room won't hook up right. We're fumbling with audio to get it to work right. And so we're still seeing this. And you wouldn't think we would after all this time. We had 5 years of trying to get this right, but it's still clunky in a lot of ways. So I think that's part of the reason why you're seeing such a push for people to come back to the office, is we kind of missed the interface of interacting with one another in person.
I would think the authenticity that's unique for each company, and trying to capture that and convey that in a way that is meaningful and shows the purpose for each organization. So I'm kind of curious how you look at those design projects to capture and reflect what's unique about each group.
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to that initial thought of taking the time to figure out someone's real culture. Because I think so often, it unfortunately gets baked down to, oh, these are their colors, and, here's their logo that we're going to blow up in some weird way. And And people can tell, right? It's not authentic, like you said. And so it takes a while to really understand, what is the culture of this company and why do people want to work there? And how do you attach that to the real purpose of it? And it's usually, 2 or 3 layers deep that you have to find that, for, in our case, like our company is employee owned. It's an ESOP. And so there's a lot of pride in ownership of what we have. And so I think about that for every company we work with, with a lot of tech companies. Well, a good example, we work with a company called Cloudflare. They do internet security amongst other things that, make the internet work really at the end of it. But their company started with this idea of a bunch of lava lamps on a wall, and they have a camera that's pointed on it. And that gets translated into, basically ones and zeros and gets fed into their security protocol. So basically no one can essentially do some kind of mathematical check and figure out how the security is working. It's this idea of entropy basically that's being introduced into it. And so every one of their locations has a different entropy moment. San Francisco, you see this huge wall of lava lamps. Austin, we have this mobile that spins around, and it's the sunlight that costs that Texas sunlight, comes through. And there's a camera on the wall where you see the different colors, and that's what gets translated into it. And so it's really fun that becomes, part of their identity, and people walk in and they get to see that. And of course, visitors come in and want to take pictures of the lava lamps. And so that's a really good example, I think, of it's inherent in who they are as a company. And then you see how that translates into the design, and it becomes something you can kind of sell.
You've been working with a lot of tech companies that are building AI tools now. And I'm really interested to find out, what's different about their workplace needs when you get these companies that are building these new AI systems. How do they look at the workplace?
What's neat is we're in a time period where everyone is testing new ideas. No one knows exactly how AI is going to impact the future, but there's lots of new, people testing ideas. And one of the really exciting ones we're working with, they started to think about AI is going to be doing the majority of programming. Companies start up now that have no staff at all. It's all AI programmers. And so it becomes this really series of entering prompts and getting the right prompt. Instead of, a series of desks in an open office, we have a series of smaller rooms that hold 4 to 6 people. And so it's these teams that can come in, and they're talking about different prompts that you might enter in terms of what the output might be for the programming. And so you have a group of these all next to one another. So you might have 4 teams, for example, that are all shredding and coming up with different ideas. And then a room that joins those 4 rooms, a larger room where they can come walk into a phone booth, initialize their prompt, see what that output is. And then they can all look and see what that looks like on a big screen, talk about it, and then go back into their individual rooms again. So it's instead of this big open area, it's a bunch of these almost smaller studios, if you will. And of course, you're still going to have a lot of employees there, but in smaller groups, because you're trying to just work through these ideas quicker. What's been interesting about it is instead of young programmers doing the majority of the work, it's now kind of unlocking more of these senior or people that have more experience in it, because, you can imagine what the prompt is going to be and what the output is going to be because you've seen it a million times. It's the same way in our industry. This, that we can often look at a test fit that somebody put together really quick and say whether it's going to work or not work because we've seen it 100 times. Here's what happens, right? So it's that same idea, only in this case, you're looking at code and understanding how that's going to translate.
How involved is AI in this whole process?
In terms of the tools of how we're creating it, of course, you can, that's been interesting because you can iterate much quicker, and it's starting to change us as designers from creators to curators at some way. So you're seeing a lot of iterations, and of course, we can use it to test lots of different visual ideas. And so a little bit on the making of it, of course. And then I think on the actual experience of the space, we're planning for AI in a future state versus a current state, right? AI can probably help with scheduling right now and can probably help with some of our lighting. But what we're having to, theorize a lot about is AI in its future state. So we're trying to make sure we accommodate all the ways besides programming. So I mentioned phone rooms to become voice prompt AI programming rooms. But I think, you start to see other ideas like like a responsive ecosystem that can start to notice that air ventilation isn't where it should be. And so it automatically turns that up. Or, when the group is all together and there's a lot of energy, that you may have a warmer lighting and, brighter lights or whatever. And then when it realizes it's kind of more heads down, quiet work, they're trying to test something, that it maybe dims the lights, or maybe it's becomes a little more, you know, blue tones so they don't fall asleep or whatever it is, because they know they need to focus. So I think that's the future state that we're trying to accommodate by allowing the flexibility within it. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops. But right now, we're kind of in that weird middle state where we're testing a lot of AI and we think we know where it's going to go, but not everything's in place yet to fully take advantage.
I think we're in this really interesting period of time now. And I'm curious how you think about the space planning piece of it, because I think we used to pack as many people as we could onto a floor plate. And so what's different now? How do you look at these spaces? What's important? What are the metrics that you're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. And what's interesting is you have a cross section of the overall workplace right now, where you still have some companies that want to pack as many people as they can in a spot. And then you have the other side that's saying, you know what? We don't need everybody to come in every day, and we can be really more intentional about how we use the space, and this idea of, workplace of choice, depending on the type of work that you're doing, that you align that environment. And that could be you and I having a conversation like this in a lounge setting, and, another group that needs to be in a 4-person room. I think I like the tools. I like being able to input, here's the way we want to use it. I like that it's given me 50 iterations of that very quickly. I think the danger, of course, is it's trying to solve a programmatic problem, and it's still not thinking about the user experience first part of it. And I think that's probably going to be, the designer's role as we move forward, is curating that, or understanding from a user experience side how that iterates. Because it is great, right? We don't now, instead of working through 3 different test fits and how that might work out, it's really great that I can very quickly get a bunch of iterations. And then what I'm now working through is, this is going to be a really great experience for the way that company likes to work. And so let's now, evolve or iterate on that smaller sample of ideas and get a whole bunch of different options. So I really love that iteration capacity has changed dramatically.
And I'm wondering, how do you balance the qualitative aspect of the space versus the quantitative and the technology, and getting these people together in the way that they work?
Understanding how they really work and how they really come together sets up that right from the beginning of making sure that we're designing the space that fits the way they're working today and allows a little flex of how they might start working in the future. So you need to ask that current state and future state where they are and where they want to be heading. This is where one thing that I'm really excited about when it comes to AI is that, like, the personalized and kind of adaptive environment. We get a little bit of that now, but I can imagine a future state here where that really starts to change, that it's almost in real time, that there's a lot more lighting and video walls and all that kind of thing that support. So right now we have a conference room, for example, and you might have a few different lighting settings, but man, can you imagine when it becomes a time where you walk into the room, it knows the type of meeting we're going to have, that the sound quality changes, that the seats automatically go up or down based on the person that's going to sit in them. All of these things are just adaptive and it's seamless. And so you don't have this kind of clunky version that we have now. But, we have seen, at least with all of the different booking systems and so forth, I have really enjoyed seeing that, at least as this first iteration, that knows I'm coming into the office, and it knows that it might send you a note and say, hey, Bob, Jeremy's going to be in on this day. Maybe we know you two want to talk about something, so it's going to set us by each other. And then maybe the rest of our team can be around us that same day. So it's, it's starting to give little nudges that are positive nudges towards the kind of thing we want to see. And I think you're going to see more and more of that, which is the thing I'm probably most excited about.
I'm curious, the variation you see across different companies that you're involved with in terms of the types of space that you're designing for them, tech-specific companies.
Yeah,
Too many companies got their own secret sauce that they're applying to it, and different ways that they work and different cultures, and what's that variation look like?
Yeah, it's been interesting, especially post-pandemic. I think you're seeing a lot of the variation maybe looks mostly like some are really geared around now lab-based work. So you might have a lot of this is still in the like science and tech industry, a company like a Meta or somebody might have a lot of labs in their space because of course have a heavy R&D type of environment where they want to test lots of different ideas. And so it becomes these labs and associated desks. And of course, there's the food and cafes and that kind of stuff to bring people together, but it's really geared around some of those kinds of things versus another company like a Google where they've started to test ideas of smaller groups, moving between different spaces, much more intentional for the type of work that you're doing. One big change has been instead of trying to keep people at the office day and night, that it's really more, they know that engineers are generally wanting to come in, 8 to 5 or 9 to 6 or whatever it is. And so how do I do my best work, intentional work in that period of time instead of, I think, the kind of the old mentality of we're going to offer all of these things on campus so that you just want to end up staying on campus all the time. But I think, there's this bigger idea now where I'm going to come in, I want it to be intentional, and I don't necessarily want to hang out there until 10 o'clock. I want to get back to my family or whatever. So I'm going to come in and do really heavy work. And so they've started to create spaces that support that idea more, that you come in, it's really intentional. Here's the meeting spaces for the smaller groups. So we've seen that start to happen. And then, of course, the other side of it that are starting to be very AI oriented and driven. And what does that mean? And so we're seeing variants there that are, we're going to test this and we're going to do, see how it works. And we're going to know what it takes to go back to what we are today if we have to. But let's go ahead and test this. And I think that's something that the tech industry is probably unique in that it can afford to test some of these far forward ideas. Because if it doesn't work, they have a plan B,
Last time we talked, we were talking about this reversion to low tech or tech-free types of things like vinyl records. And I just saw an article about how those point and shoot digital cameras now are coming back. So I'm curious, are you starting to see that in the spaces that you're designing to create low tech environments?
Yeah. That has been interesting. You saw that the slow food movement, and as you mentioned, you're seeing it across all the way. So yeah, we're starting to see that as well in the workplace now that as far as tech is going, that you now see just the opposite, that people want to have these no tech areas as well, where you can't bring in your phone, or you at least can't be talking on your phone or engaging with it. It's really meant to be a tech-free spot. And sometimes it's meant to socialize. So you could imagine like a campfire, almost like you would have outside, where people are sitting around the fire and socializing or talking or having kind of deep conversation. You can imagine it as almost like a cave-like setting where it's really individual, that you're going in there just kind of almost for a meditative state to get away from all of that. I think because we're surrounded so often by all of the tech, that there's just as much by saying, let's bring people together for this tech-free reason to really engage and be forced to engage and create those interactions with one another. It's one of the things we lost during the pandemic is we only engaged over tech for the longest time. And so you're seeing the other side, right? And I think that's why you're seeing music festivals and all these things become so popular, because we miss that human interaction, that like purposeful interaction. So to have spaces in your office that are tech-free spots, we are absolutely seeing that. And I think you're also going to see that, potentially in the materiality, just as you're starting to see materials, really the technology there start to alter and change. I think you're going to see this kind of desire for handmade or hand carved, or these things that are really authentically made, that that was that tree that was carved down and used for the wood in this building. And there's a story there, that it wasn't machined by robots and I wasn't doing all these things. It was really, truly authentic. And you're going to see both sides there, right? We're going to see these huge advancements, the 3D printing buildings and all of that kind of stuff. But I think equally, you're going to see this industry that comes up that is all true, authentic, because of that. That counterculture is going to want that. How do I know this is real? What's that authentic side look?
Sounds like we're going to be celebrating human imperfection in these.
I think so. I'm going to be curious to see if people are desiring, hand drawn renderings and stuff again, because photorealism and now videos are becoming so easy to produce. But then, you're going to ask, is that really hand drawn? You're going to want to see people hand draw it, so it's really done. Yeah.
One of the other priorities that's emerged is health and well-being, and I'm curious how that's being applied to these environments.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the best parts of where AI can take us, I think, is because you have now all of these sensors and tech in the space, that just this overall idea of wellness can really be evolved much further than it has. And so, this is where you start to have, lighting that can change throughout the day based on the user's tasks and what the kind of work you're doing and how you feel. I worked in Seattle for a long time, and of course the winters can be long. And so, a lot of people end up having the sad lights there to help offset that kind of gloomy feeling. And I think you see this now as forest fires become more and more prevalent, that it'd be nice to have the monitors there that say, hey, we know that the wind is changing direction. We need to put filters in so that your ventilation stays clean inside, and increase ventilation, if it starts to be too stagnant. So that wellness idea, and I think also just the nudges, right? That we're starting to see a little bit more, that maybe your desk automatically, rises at a right time so that it gets you to stand up, or the different things like that. I think you're going to start to see it's going to be dialed into. Bob, you haven't got up and walked for a while, or you haven't got water, and we're not going to do it in an annoying way. We're going to do it in this very subtle, nice nudge that you're not even going to realize is tech helping to support that to happen, but it's going to happen,
I'm curious, you're working with all these advanced technology companies. How are you engaging with AI and technology in the work that you do?
Yeah, I've been, just personally, of course, Google's one of my largest clients, so I'm a Gemini subscriber. I've forced myself every day to be engaging in some way, to be, I think you have to be doing training, you have to be doing testing, but I think I would encourage everyone right now to force yourself just to try and test it a little bit every day. In the office, we're of course be testing all the rendering software and video software, and it's been fun. Sometimes we have these proposals, we have to turn it around in 2 or 3 days. And there used to be, if you got time to sketch a little idea, it was as far as you could do in that kind of a turnaround. What's really great now is you can do a quick little sketch and upload that into some of these softwares and put together a full video of, hey, here, this is an idea of what it might look for. We're not asking for it to design for us, but maybe just like help paint a picture for somebody on what this might feel like and look like. And then of course, it also does a lot of my spreadsheet work and that kind of stuff, the part of my job that have to do that I don't love, right? The operational side, please take that part from me so I can spend more time on the creative side.
As you look out into the future, how do you see AI evolving or changing the profession?
Yeah, we think about that a lot, because I think, right now, the profession is still largely built on getting paid for hours of work. Not always, but quite often it's based on that idea. And we have to start to move the industry towards getting paid for value instead of time, if you will. Because I think, as clearly, as you're starting to see, in the same way that programmers are not going to be utilized in the same way they are, my guess is construction documents or permit reviews, those kinds of things will be automated at some point in time. And so where the real value is going to be, again, is on the front end of things, really curating the right program, taking the time to make sure that it aligns with people's culture, doing that initial design portion of it. And then at some point, it'll be able to automate construction documents and check codes. And yes, we're going to need to make sure us as architects are still reviewing those things, because I think you're going to see the first litigation at some point in time that's going to say, AI reviewed this. Like, well, it's your stamp, So we're still going to have to make sure that we're doing those checks and making sure that the documents are right. But there will be a part where a lot of that can be automated. And so we need to move towards a value-based model instead of an hour-based model.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm curious, for people that are designing AI spaces and the creators and even maybe younger architects coming into the profession, what kind of suggestions or recommendations do you have for them about how they should approach this?
I would tell them now, be testing and iterating as much as you can. There's a million different software pieces that are coming out. Most of them, because it's in the early stages, are free. I would encourage them to be testing a lot, but because I think, again, in the same way that I mentioned, young programmers are not being utilized the same way. The same thing is going to be true for the youngest designers coming out of school right now. For us, the pencil was still the input and maybe the keyboard and mouse. But for this group, they're going to come up with AI being much more, they've been talking to Alexa for a number of years. My son uses that all the time. And so they're going to be coming in used to inputting either vocally or through hand gestures or, much different ways. And so I would encourage them to use that don't try and learn the way we're doing it. Use that as your superpower, if you will, really dive into it. Because I think that's going to be where we start to really see our practice advance, and don't lose sight of the human touch. I think that's probably the biggest thing is you still go out and watch how people engage, where they find real meaning. Because I think that's probably my biggest fear is, we're going to automate all of this and then we're going to lose the human side of it potentially if we don't take the time to make sure. Yeah, this is why people wanted to come together to eat. Don't try and, fast food it. Let's actually take the time to do that. Why did people come together and engage in a meeting or have a design session or any of those things? And just make sure we don't lose that human engagement. So that'll be, I think, the thing to be careful of right now.
Yeah, I would agree. Let me ask you, we've talked about a pretty broad range of topics here. Is there anything we've left out that you think is important to include in this conversation?
I think, again, just going back to how this all started is just being always really open to when you see opportunities. I think sometimes we have this preconceived idea of I want to do this thing and this is outside of the pathway. You never know necessarily how things are going to take you in life. And so I just encourage, people say yes more than saying no. It may not seem like this aligns directly, but you never know where that path is going to lead you. And I think if you have that outlook of saying yes and making the best of it, that you're likely to advance in some ways. And you may not know where that end place is going to be, but just being open to opportunity that is less obvious. I think I would encourage all young people really to be thinking about that.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. My last question, we go out 10 years, 2035, what's the AI driven workplace look and feel like for you?
Yeah, it's a few things. Like I mentioned, the invisible, seamless interface, that's probably the biggest thing. Tech just works for us. Like I said, you're not having to input anything. It's just going to work. And we may not even be having computers. It might just be an implant or something. We're seeing it through our own eyes, which would be great. The ecosystem is, dynamic and responsive to the users and what the space is doing, what's happening outside. It's personalized and adaptive. And I think from even the user experience side is it's not going to be a static space. Everything is going to be very engaging. Some of it annoying. Probably you can imagine the advertising agency is very excited about how they can dial in an ad that's going to be very specific to you, Bob, and a different one to me based on a lot of different parameters, but also equally engaging on a space that is very, I guess, devoid of that kind of stuff, but geared around work or maybe our homes, how they're going to be. The lighting's going to be right. The water temperature is going to be right. That this is going to feel the way it should be, the way that you want it to be.
Am I going to be subjected to advertising in these tech immersive spaces?
I think so. We've all seen the movies. I'm a big science fiction fan. I don't think there's any way around that, unfortunately, on some of the street level,
Jeremy, this has been great. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your insights with us. And I'll look forward to see what kind of great projects you have coming out in the future. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. This is really fun.